priest in the parish of St. Martin de Porres, Corial. In Corial, we are part of the cluster of Sangre Grande and Corial, and it's just a wonderful country place, much like here where I was back in 2011 when I joined the pre-seminary on Ash Wednesday of that year. I think that was March 11th, something like that. Of course, I joined with my brothers, Fathers Kenwin Sylvester and Father Kwesi Allen. Yes, I think I got the names right. So we were three priests who entered here in this wonderful parish of Our Lady of Mount Carmel on that Ash Wednesday evening. And Father Roger Paponet, who was then director of Vocations, received us into this wonderful parish, this wonderful community where we've made long-lasting friendships. Well, typically people think of vocation as call, and it is, but for me, I tend to identify vocation much more with Saint Irenaeus saying the glory of God is man fully alive. So vocation really is a call to live, and a call to live love. So whatever you find yourself doing that brings life and flourishing and gives love both to you and to others can rightfully be identified as vocation. That's the way that I tend to perceive it. It's a call from God, to love others, to love yourself. So my vocation right now is to be a priest. I say right now because God continues to call. One of the beauties of life is that God continues to reveal himself in so many ways to us. And it just, in the midst of it all, people get married, which is a vocation, and then a vocation to being parents can come up, and they may also have a vocation to teach or to be a doctor or some. And it's the same thing with priesthood, where I find myself as a pastor at this point in time. I've in some way being funneled into spiritual direction, otherwise into administration, because of my civil career prior to entering into the priesthood. I also see myself being directed by God in those many ways. So my vocation right now, in a nutshell, is a priest of God who is discerning how better to serve God and God's people through the priesthood in many various ways. So I think that one myth about my vocation of priesthood, and maybe of any vocation, is that poof, it comes out of the sky, some calling, some revelation, and that it just happens. So the myth is that there is nothing that we need to do on our path to get here. The myth is that God just calls you and that's it, and there is no discernment or human interaction, but grace builds on nature. And who God has called me to be has allowed me to become a priest and to discern this vocation and to use my gifts in this way. And it's the same thing with all vocations. So that myth that it just comes from God magically and there's nothing to do, no response, is one of those things that needs to be dispelled. We really need to cooperate with God in building up his kingdom. So that may be a bit of a funny story. In 2008, I believe it is, October, I attended a retreat. And at that retreat, at the closing mass, Father Cornelius Philip pointed at me and several others, and he said to me, "You can be a priest." Now, what he didn't know at the time was that I had long dreamt of being a priest in my earlier days, but something that I shelved as I went into studies, as I went into my civil career, having become quite successful in my own professional life. It didn't seem like something that really could be achieved or done at that point in time. But as I grew from that moment, thinking that it wasn't for me, I simultaneously began doing that work that I just mentioned, and that work was growing in love with God, growing in love with God's people, attending daily mass, it was attending Eucharistic adoration, it was going to confession as often as I could, it was becoming a catechist, getting involved in the life of the church, learning to love people. And when that started happening, I recognized that I spent more time in church and in God's service than I did at my civil career and in my relationships at that point in time. And pretty soon, I came to recognize that marriage wasn't for me, that being the vocation that I previously thought that I had. I recognized that I wasn't being fulfilled in the way that I believe God wanted in those relationships. Nothing wrong with marriage, nothing wrong with the young ladies, etc. But I just recognized that I could love so much deeper. And because of that, I decided to enter the seminary. Or at least the thought became concrete in my mind, and then I began a process of discernment in a really particular way, contacting the Vocations director, going on retreats, getting more information, etc., and eventually entering into the formation system by entering the pre-seminary, which was then located here at Our Lady of Mount Carmel in Carpichaima. So I would say those discerning my vocation to priesthood or any other vocation to religious life, to marriage, to a dedicated single life, whatever it may be, simply listen to God. Grace builds on nature. And similarly, the glory of God is man fully alive, as attributed to Saint Irenaeus. So wherever you find your deepest passion, your zeal, your love, wherever you're attracted to in the most fundamental ways in life, anything that really pulls you into being who you are, is that space where God is revealing to you your vocation. And I would suggest that you just listen to God, to whatever He is saying in that moment. Spend some time reflecting, speak to someone about it, because oftentimes we are afraid of what it might mean. But just speak to God about it and see where He is directing you, and whether or not this might in fact be the place where your happiness, your flourishing might lie. I'd also give this advice: not to run away when things seemingly become difficult, because there are many spots of difficulties which will crop up, and that difficulty will crop up no matter where you are, whether you are discerning this vocation, whether you aren't considering vocation at all. Life is choices, and life is difficulty as well. It's just part of what we face. So don't run when challenges occur. Rather, lean into that discomfort and into what God is saying. Listen to Him.